Your weekly installment of News to You, remembering the capture of one of the world's most wanted fugitives and how the concept of car sharing Main Street is older than you might think. Dave McKinley remembers when those stories and more were all news to you.
10 years ago this week.
This not only gives us hope, it gives us a real future.
Big doings in Dunkirk when the governor promised the shuttered coal-fired NRG plant would be brought back to life by converting it to natural gas.
Output will go from 75 megawatts now to 435 megawatts.
Well, like a lot of other lofty promises made back then by the governor, this too never came to pass. The plant was never reopened, and nowadays the state takes a dim view of natural gas as an energy source. Jameis Winston won the Heisman Trophy as a freshman, becoming the youngest ever recipient of college football's top individual honor, and a Gallup poll was released on honesty and ethics in professions, which found that members of Congress were rated among the least trustworthy by Americans. A decade later, the latest poll indicates they've slipped even further, rating only above telemarketers. 20 years ago this week.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Saddam is captured!
And the news spread quickly.
The man who ruled Iraq for nearly a quarter century was found in a dirt hole in this farmhouse near his hometown of Tikrit. His beard long, his expression bewildered.
Captured by U.S. forces in a surprise nighttime raid.
U.S. troops were ready to throw a grenade under this camouflage cover when a bearded man inside piped up in English.
And then the response from U.S. soldiers was President Bush sends his regards.
Good riddance.
Not everyone was celebrating.
At a rally in Tikrit yesterday, hundreds of Iraqis yelled, "Saddam is in our hearts." U.S. soldiers yelled back, "Saddam is in our jail."
He has now been deloused in front of the entire world.
And he would be hanged a little over 3 years after his capture this week in 2003. 30 years ago this week, shock jock Howard Stern, having conquered radio and television, was on the path to literary success with the release of an autobiography, which his fans stood in line for hours to get. This week's News to You pop quiz: what was the name of Stern's book, which debuted as #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list, stayed there for 5 weeks, and became the fastest-selling title in the history of Simon & Schuster? Remember, this was back when the parking lot in front of the Seneca Niagara Casino was instead an ice rink in front of the Niagara Falls Convention and Civic Center, when Tom Brokaw was just halfway through his more than 20-year stint as the anchor of NBC Nightly News, and less than a decade after they were banished to make way for the Metro Rail, talk began about bringing cars back to Main Street.
I think we have to worry about mixing Metro Rail vehicles, automobiles, and pedestrians in the same area. And really thinking that through.
Well, it would take more than 20 years, but eventually we would see what they first began talking about this week in 1993. 40 years ago this week, and long before they ever thought of building an indoor practice facility, the Bills used to practice in the stadium, in the snow. And back in those days, when their opponents came to town, they just got off the plane and walked through the airport concourse with everyone else. Why, here come the L.A. Raiders. There's Jim Plunkett, there's Marcus Allen, there's Al Davis, and say, isn't this Lyle Alzado?
I'd never tell you or anybody else.
Your cab is right over this way, sir. Back in the days when it was all news to you.
Thank you, Dave. So here's the answer to this week's News to You pop quiz. Did you remember the name of Howard Stern's book, Patrick?
I remember the cover, which we just saw. It's coming to me, but
it was released 30 years ago this week. It was called Private Parts.
Private Parts, that's right. Okay.
So his book debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, stayed there for 5 weeks. It was the fastest selling title in the history of Simon & Schuster.